I sat there in the office I helped build floors I once scrubbed. When the janitor quit nights I worked unpaid just to keep payroll going and listened to my own son fire me with a smug smile. "It's business, Mom," he said like I was a stranger. I gave up everything for Tyler, my career, my health, even my marriage. And this is how he repays me, tossed out like yesterday's lunch. That was the moment something broke inside me. I refused to be trampled on any longer. What my son doesn't know is that I own the parent company. My name is Joanne Carlisle, and I live in Colorado, and this is where my silence ends. I never thought I'd be humiliated by my own child. Not like that. Not in the building I helped finance, in the boardroom I designed myself, at the company I poured my blood into. My name is Joanne Carlisle, and I live in Boulder, Colorado. I've lived a simple life, no luxury vacations, no wild spending, no diamonds. I invested everything I had into my son, into his dream, into this company. So when Tyler, my only son, called me into that glass-walled conference room, I thought maybe it was a thank you, or perhaps just a moment to reminisce about how far we'd come. I even dressed nicely, wearing the blue blazer he once said made me look strong and smart. I sat down with a hopeful heart. But hope is a fool's drug. He didn't even let me finish my coffee. "Mom, this is hard," he said, not looking me in the eye. "But the board and I think it's time for you to step aside." "Step aside," I blinked. "For good," he clarified. It was like hearing a second language, one that made my stomach turn and my chest seize. "You're firing me?" I asked, incredulous. "It's not personal," he said, as if that somehow softened the blow. "You've done a lot for the company. We all respect that. But it's a new era. We need to move in a different direction." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was surreal. This was the same boy I stayed up with through chicken pox and nightmares, the same boy I gave my life to when his father walked out on us, the same boy who couldn't even drive a car when I signed my retirement savings over to a dream, his dream that became our company. I gave him everything, every waking hour, every dime I could scrape. I worked the accounting books at 2 a.m. I cleaned the office myself when we couldn't afford janitorial staff. I handled investor meetings with shaking hands while Tyler was still learning how to pitch. I kept the lights on. And this was my reward. "You're overreacting," he said when I just sat there stunned, speechless. Overreacting. My voice cracked, and I hated how it made me sound weak. "Tyler, I didn't just work for this company. I bled for it. I paid for your MBA, your car, your suits, your life. How dare you?" He rolled his eyes. "Mom, don't make this emotional. It's not personal. The team just thinks—" "No," I snapped. "You think? This was your decision." He shrugged. "Let's be honest, your ideas are outdated. The staff barely listens to you. You're more of a symbol now. This isn't about disrespect, it's about relevance." There it was. Not personal, just irrelevant. He handed me a folder with my transition package, a neat, pathetic little pile of legal jargon and pity payments. It was already signed, already decided. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping loudly against the tile. The silence in that room was suffocating. I looked around at the view I fought for, the art I personally selected for this space. I could almost hear the echo of our early days back when Tyler still called me Mama and asked for help with client spreadsheets. That version of my son was gone. And in his place stood a polished, cruel executive who saw me as nothing more than a leftover obligation, a piece of expired furniture. I walked out of that room with my spine straight but my hands shaking. That night I didn't cry. Not like I thought I would. I sat in the living room of my modest house surrounded by silent photo frames and unopened wine bottles from company anniversaries we used to celebrate together. My palms burned with humiliation, my chest with rage. And then something happened. A thought, a spark. What Tyler didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had made a decision years ago, a protective move just in case things went sideways. When we were desperate for seed funding, I reached out to an old college friend, Amelia, who had since made a fortune in private equity. She offered to invest, but she wanted the deal done quietly through a holding company she controlled. I negotiated the terms, and she insisted I keep a minority stake in her entity, just in case I ever wanted to buy in further. 2 years later, I did. Quietly, strategically, I bought controlling shares in that parent company out of my own pocket. I never told Tyler. He was too busy trying to impress Silicon Valley to ask where the money came from. The company that now owns Tyler's precious firm. It's mine. And the only reason I haven't used that power is because I was still clinging to the fantasy that one day my son would grow up to be decent, that he would remember who stood beside him when everyone else walked away. That fantasy died in that boardroom. I refuse to be trampled on any longer. He thinks he ended something today, but all he did was awaken the very force he dismissed. I am not just his mother. I am his silent shareholder, his puppet master, and I'm done staying in the shadows. Tyler likes to pretend the company was born the day he cut the ribbon on our sleek downtown headquarters. That polished video of him standing in a navy blue suit talking about disruption, legacy, and vision, all that nonsense, it's a fairy tale, a glossy rewrite. The truth is far messier, grittier. The truth has broken nails and late-night ramen and IRS letters I had to hide under the mattress. When people ask me how we started, I tell them with one idea and zero safety nets. It was Tyler's idea, yes, but he was 23 and impulsive, still reeling from a bad breakup, and convinced he'd invent the next Apple. He came to me with sketches on napkins, half-baked business plans, and zero clue how to register an LLC. And I, like a fool with a mother's heart, said yes. I was 50 then, working as a senior office manager for a construction firm. Good pay, decent benefits, but no upward mobility. I had about $90,000 in retirement, a slowly paid-off mortgage, and an aching back that warned me I was running out of time. Still, I liquidated half my savings, just until we get our first investor. Tyler said, his eyes bright and hopeful. "You won't regret it, Mom." And I believed him. We rented a cramped one-room co-working space above a taco shop. It smelled like grease and ambition. Tyler talked and dreamed. I filed the paperwork, applied for grants, and filled out pitch decks while he polished his social media accounts. When the janitor stopped coming, I brought gloves and bleach and scrubbed the floors myself. When he forgot a meeting with an angel investor, I rearranged everything and begged for a second chance. When payroll was due, I cashed out my remaining 401k and lied to the bank. Every time there was a disaster, our first app crashed the lawsuit from a competitor, the 2 months we went without power, I was the one who made it right. I begged vendors for extensions. I taught myself basic code. I watched YouTube videos at 2 a.m., trying to understand things Tyler should have known but never cared to learn. But I never told him how much it hurt. I never told him I was skipping meals, that I had to cancel my physical therapy, that I sometimes lay awake at night wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Because every time he smiled and said, "We're almost there, Mom," I wanted to believe it. People think being a mother means giving life once. But the truth is, you give it again and again and again every time they fall, every time they call, every time they need you and don't even realize what they're asking for. It wasn't until year 3 that things started to shift. We landed our first major client. Tyler's LinkedIn blew up. Investors started circling. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of the Wonder Kid and his revolutionary software platform. And I started fading into the background. At first, it was subtle. My name vanished from the About page. My role was reduced to operations advisor, even though I still handled contracts and tax filings. Tyler said it was to make us look more youth-driven to attract startup money. Then came the rebranding, new colors, new logos, new slogans. Tyler hired consultants, designers, PR agents. He was photographed, interviewed, quoted. I stood behind the cameras clapping like a proud stage mom. By year 5, he introduced himself as the founder. Period. No mention of me, not even as a co-founder. Just Tyler Carlisle, visionary CEO. It stung, but I bit my tongue. Because he was doing well, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. But the real break happened the night of our launch gala. The company had finally hit its first $10 million in revenue. We threw a lavish party in a downtown Denver ballroom. Everyone was there, investors, clients, tech, media. Tyler had rented a tux and given a 15-minute keynote speech filled with stories about his solo journey. And when I walked up to join him afterward, champagne glass in hand, he turned slightly, just slightly, and whispered, "Mom, don't be too visible tonight, okay? I want the crowd focused on the future, not the past." The past? That's what I was to him, a relic, a burden. I left early that night and cried in the Uber all the way home. From that moment on, something in me started to shift. I stopped volunteering extra hours. I stopped cleaning up after his sloppy decisions. I stopped covering for him when investors asked tough questions. And quietly, I began protecting myself. I went through old contracts. I reacquainted myself with the paperwork from Amelia's holding company. I made discreet inquiries, purchased silent stakes, built a firewall. Because even then, before he betrayed me openly, a small voice inside me whispered, "Prepare. One day you'll need it." Still, I didn't expect the betrayal to come so cleanly, so coldly, like a guillotine drop. I thought there would be hesitation, a moment of doubt, a flicker of love. There wasn't. Tyler didn't hesitate to erase me, because in his mind I wasn't a partner. I was scaffolding, temporary support, something to be removed once the structure stood on its own. But he forgot one thing. I wasn't just holding him up, I was holding the foundation. And now he's about to feel the quake. I used to think Tyler was just ambitious, driven, like his father never was. I told myself he bent the truth because he was young, because he didn't know better, because that's just how business worked now. Everyone fluffed, resumes, embellished stories, exaggerated wins. But it wasn't until I was pushed out that I began tracing the wreckage back to its source. And it all led to his lies. Little ones at first, harmless almost. I handled that meeting when I had actually written the proposal. My team secured the funding when I'd personally sat in front of the investor and pitched my heart out. At first, I let it go. I thought, what does it matter who gets credit as long as the company grows? But lies, I've learned, are like mold. They spread, they fester, and they rot the structure beneath until everything collapses. After he fired me, I couldn't sleep. The betrayal replayed in my head like a broken record, and the only thing that soothed the burn was truth. Cold, hard, provable truth. So I started digging. I went back through the archives, the ones he thought I didn't have access to. I still had access to some old folders accounts they'd forgotten to revoke, and what I found made my stomach churn. In every pitch deck from the last 2 years, Tyler had positioned himself as the sole visionary founder. I was not mentioned once, not even in footnotes. No reference to the early years. No nod to his mother. Just a glossy photo of him in front of a whiteboard and paragraphs that read like a love letter to his own ego. In one interview, he claimed he bootstrapped the company using savings from odd jobs and part-time gigs. Odd jobs. What he meant was my life savings, my pension, my dreams of a modest, peaceful retirement by a lake somewhere in upstate Colorado. There was more. He'd gone on podcasts talking about how he mentored himself in business strategy, about how he taught himself accounting after college. No mention of the nights I sat beside him with ledgers open and QuickBooks tutorials playing on repeat. No memory of me skipping dinner to fix his misfiled tax documents so he wouldn't get penalized. And then came the real gut punch. I found a recorded panel event from just a few months ago, hosted by a VC firm we'd once courted. Someone in the audience asked about family involvement in the business. Tyler chuckled and said, "My mom was supportive emotionally, but this company was always my thing. She didn't really understand the space. I knew I had to run with it on my own. Supportive emotionally. As if I was a cheerleader on the sidelines while he built an empire. As if I wasn't the one dragging us both through every firestorm with grit in my teeth and a calculator in my hand." That's when it shifted. My pain began to boil into something sharper. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was insulted. And I was done watching him rewrite history with a grin. The lies weren't just personal, they were professional, dangerous. Tyler had constructed an entire public persona built on fantasy, and that fantasy was attracting funding, real money, real investors, people who were betting on a version of him that never existed. I started making calls, quiet ones. I reconnected with Iris Chen, one of our earliest marketing hires who'd left when Tyler refused to give her credit for a viral campaign she'd built. She answered on the second ring. "Joanne," she said, "I didn't think I'd ever hear from you again." "I'm not calling as your former boss," I told her. "I'm calling as someone who was just erased." There was a long pause, and then I've been waiting for this day. She wasn't the only one. One by one, I began gathering pieces. Former employees, burned vendors, silenced consultants. Everyone had a story. A contract Tyler had breached. A handshake deal he'd broken. A promise he'd forgotten the moment he no longer needed them. I wasn't planning revenge, not yet. I was preparing a case. Because the more I found, the clearer it became. Tyler wasn't just a liar. He was a fraud. He hadn't just erased me, he'd erased everyone. And people were starting to notice. One investor told me off the record that he was considering pulling out after noticing inconsistencies in the pitch documents. A competitor hinted that Tyler had borrowed their features without attribution. Even our original lawyer, Gerald, admitted Tyler had signed NDAs that were quietly ignored. My son had become a man who would burn bridges while claiming he built the roads himself, and I had enabled it. That realization hit harder than anything else. I wasn't just a victim of his betrayal, I was complicit in creating the monster. I taught him perseverance, yes, but I also taught him that I'd always clean up after him, that I'd always nod, smile, and stay quiet. Not anymore, because the house of cards he built on borrowed charm and stolen credit was already shaking, and I was about to pull the last card. People say you can't serve two masters. I tried to serve three, my husband, my son, and the dream. I lost two. Only the company survived. Before the business took over everything, I was married to a quiet man named Victor, an engineer, analytical, calm, emotionally unavailable in the most polite ways. He loved order, schedules, predictability. He wasn't cruel, not at all, but he wasn't made for the chaos of ambition either. And I brought chaos. Not on purpose. It started as love, a mother's belief that her son's dream deserved wings. But dreams are greedy things. They eat time energy, sleep even love, until there's nothing left but their sharp edges. I didn't see the signs at first. Victor tried. He really did. In the early days, he offered to help balance budgets. He read articles on tech startups, even though he didn't understand half of it. He told Tyler he was proud of him. But slowly, I began to notice the way he'd sigh when I came home late again, the way he stopped waiting up for me, how our dinners grew quiet, how his eyes no longer lit up when I spoke about launch deadlines or investor calls. I didn't blame him, not entirely. He had married a woman with a steady job and a sensible wardrobe, not someone pulling all-nighters at a co-working space sharing ramen with interns and using YouTube to learn how to build a website. But I thought I truly believed he'd stay, that he'd understand I was building something bigger than myself. I was wrong. The breaking point came after year 2. Tyler had finally landed a big partnership deal, one I'd spent weeks negotiating, refining, massaging. We should have been celebrating. Instead, I came home to find Victor in the kitchen suitcase by his feet. "I'm moving in with Mark for a while," he said, "just to get some clarity." Clarity, the word stuck like glass in my throat. "You're leaving," I said stupidly, "now after everything." He looked tired, not angry, just defeated. "Joe, I don't even know who I'm married to anymore. You sleep 3 hours a night. You talk to Tyler more than you talk to me. I didn't sign up to play second fiddle to a business plan." I begged him to stay. I told him we were almost there, that once we stabilized, once we got funding, things would calm down. He shook his head slowly. "There's always going to be another milestone, Joanne. I just want a wife again, not a partner, not a co-founder, a wife." He walked out that night. We never fully recovered. The divorce was civil. Quiet. No screaming, no cheating, just distance. Like two people who forgot how to share a language. I signed the papers 6 months later with a trembling hand and a forced smile for Tyler. Tyler never asked about the split, not once. He was too busy attending pitch meetings and playing the role of prodigy CEO. Maybe he thought we drifted apart because we were just different. Maybe he thought I didn't try hard enough. He never asked what I gave up to make sure he had a future. But I remember every single trade I made. I gave up lazy Sundays and movie nights, quiet walks and shared pillows. I gave up love so my son could build something he believed in. And still, it wasn't enough. Victor remarried 2 years later, a woman named Ellen. She teaches literature and owns a golden retriever. I saw their wedding photos on Facebook. He looks happy, peaceful, as if the weight he carried with me had finally been set down. I don't blame him. I really don't. Some women cry after divorce. Some rage. I didn't do either. I worked. I filed incorporation paperwork while my heart bled. I learned about convertible notes while signing divorce decrees. I chose not to feel it because if I let it in, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to crawl back out. I was building a company, a legacy. That had to be enough. For a while it was. I thought that once Tyler found his footing, he'd circle back, that he'd see me. Not just the woman who kept the lights on or the one who booked the meetings, but the woman who gave up her life so he could rise. But success doesn't humble everyone. Sometimes it just feeds the worst parts. Tyler didn't slow down. He didn't reconnect. He flew higher and faster, surrounded himself with yes men and polished executives. He stopped visiting on weekends. Calls turned to texts. Texts turned to silence. And I, who had sacrificed everything marriage money time, became a line in his biography. And eventually, not even that. I thought losing my marriage was the price of building something worthwhile. But now I see it for what it was, the first crack in a foundation that would never return the loyalty I poured into it. I gave up love for Tyler. And he repaid me with absence, with lies, with erasure. So be it. The company survived. And now that I know what he's made of, it will survive him too. Because I'm done giving everything away. From now on, I take back what's mine. There's a kind of silence that settles over a room just before someone gets humiliated. A tense, vibrating hush, like the seconds before a storm hits. I've heard it before. I heard it the day my supervisor at the construction firm told me I'd never be promoted because I smiled too much and negotiated too little. I heard it the day my divorce was finalized, right before the judge handed me my copy of the decree like it was a takeout receipt. But nothing prepared me for the silence I heard that morning in the main conference room when my son, the boy I nursed through asthma who once cried over scraped knees, turned me into a punchline. It was a Thursday. Team update meeting, the kind we used to do in the back of a shared workspace with coffee cups and whiteboards covered in wild dreams. Back then, everyone wore jeans and hope. Now everyone wore suits and fear. Tyler had been riding high on a recent funding round $8 million from a West Coast investor who thought we were the next big thing in logistics automation. He'd been giving interviews and hosting strategy huddles like he was running Tesla. I was still listed as special advisor to operations, which basically meant I showed up, kept quiet, and made sure nobody burned the place down from behind the scenes. That morning, I took my usual seat near the end of the table. I wore a modest gray blazer, the same one I'd worn the day we signed our first partnership contract. It still made me feel grounded, like I belonged. Tyler stood at the head of the table, arms crossed like some tech world deity. "Before we begin," he said, smirking just slightly, "I just want to recognize that some of our methods lately may feel a bit outdated." People chuckled politely, confused. He clicked to the next slide from legacy to leadership. And right there, bullet-pointed beneath it, were phrases I recognized as criticisms he'd thrown at me in private, overly risk-averse, attached to obsolete systems, emotionally driven decision-making. I sat up straighter. My stomach tightened. Someone glanced at me, a quiet, uncertain look. "I know some of you are used to the old guard's way of doing things," Tyler continued with that smooth, rehearsed tone, "but it's time to modernize. We're not a family business anymore. We're a tech leader, and tech leaders don't run on sentimentality." My heart froze. He was talking about me, to everyone, openly, shamelessly. I opened my mouth, then closed it. My lips were dry, my breath shallow. "I respect what got us here," he said with mock gravity. "But if we want to scale, we have to be ruthless with tradition. Comfort zones won't take us global." Another laugh. Nervous, safe. Like hyenas unsure if the alpha is joking. He moved on to charts, metrics. His voice grew distant as I stared at the bullet points, each one a dagger disguised as a strategy. I wanted to walk out, but I couldn't give him that. So I sat, still, expressionless. I kept my hands in my lap so no one would see them shaking. When the meeting ended, people filed out quickly, murmuring about tasks and timelines. No one made eye contact, not even Sarah, who I mentored for 2 years. Not even Matt, who once said I saved his job when his numbers dipped. Tyler barely glanced at me as he packed up his laptop. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, flat and casual, like he was asking if I wanted cream in my coffee. I didn't answer, because if I did, I would have either screamed or cried, and neither would have been worth the energy. That night, I sat in my kitchen long after the lights went out. I didn't cook dinner, I didn't answer calls. I just sat there, fingers tapping the edge of the table, counting every breath between the shame and the fury. He had erased me in public. Not just in the press or behind closed doors, but now in front of the very people I helped recruit, train, and shape. He wanted me small, quiet, forgettable. But I had news for him. I may have been humiliated, but I was not broken. That moment, watching my legacy get slandered in a slide deck, did something permanent to me. It stripped away the last fragments of my delusion, the belief that he would one day come around, that he would remember. No, Tyler wasn't lost. It was gone. And if he could reduce me to a side note in front of our team, then I could reduce him to nothing in front of the board. I'd stayed in the shadows long enough. The next morning, I put on the same gray blazer. I opened my private drive, and I started drafting a dossier, a comprehensive account of every contribution, every signed document, every financial record proving who I was and what I had done. But this wasn't for the team. This was for the board of directors. Because what my son didn't know, what he would never see coming, was that I held a controlling interest in the company that owned his company, and I had every intention of using it. He wanted to humiliate me. Fine. Let him taste the shame when he learns who really signs the checks. For years, I let Tyler believe I was just his mother, his backup, his sounding board, his emotional safety net. He thought I stayed on as a formality, a figurehead to placate the old-timers while he ran the show. But I wasn't a figurehead, and I sure as hell wasn't just his mother anymore. I was his largest threat, and he had no idea. It started as a protective decision back when we were desperate for funding. We needed capital and fast. Tyler had burned through our initial seed money with overpriced developers and one failed ad campaign. I told him I'd try reaching out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Amelia Grant, my college roommate. She was tough, brilliant, and now the managing partner of a private equity firm in Chicago. I pitched her the vision. She liked it, but she didn't want her name associated directly with something so risky. Too many failures in this space, she said, but I'll back it under a different name. So we created a holding company, North Hollow Ventures. Clean, anonymous, and on paper, nothing to do with me. Amelia wired the money. In exchange, we signed over 32% of our fledgling business to North Hollow with a 2-year silent equity clause and the option to increase control pending future investment. What Tyler didn't know was that Amelia offered me 15% of her holding company as part of the deal for initiating negotiating and guaranteeing our compliance. 2 years later, when Tyler was busy courting Silicon Valley, I bought more shares in North Hollow. Quietly, strategically. By the time we hit our Series B, I had acquired majority control of North Hollow Ventures, and by extension, majority control of the very company Tyler now paraded as his. I kept it quiet not out of fear, but out of hope. Hope that I'd never need to use it. Hope that one day Tyler would turn around and say, "Mom, let's run this together again." That he'd remember I was the one who saved him from bankruptcy more than once. That he'd give me the respect I never asked for, but always deserved. But that hope died in the staff meeting. And now I wasn't going to ask for respect. I was going to take it. I spent the next few days reviewing every inch of our operating agreement, every board voting rule, every clause that could be leveraged. I still had Amelia's number, and when I called, she picked up on the first ring. "Took you long enough," she said, her voice clipped, like she'd been expecting this. "You knew he'd do this to me?" I asked, half shocked, half hollow. She sighed. "Joe, I didn't know, but I saw it coming. You made him into a CEO before he became a man. That rarely ends well." I didn't argue. Instead, I told her what he'd done. The lies, the erasure, the public humiliation. Amelia didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "So what's your move?" I want to call a board meeting, I said. Emergency session. Bypass Tyler entirely. There was a pause. Then the faint click of her typing. You're still listed as silent board counsel through North Hollow, she said. But if you activate your voting rights, it will trigger disclosure to the executive team. He'll know. Everyone will know. I want them to know, I said quietly. For so long, I thought silence was dignity. That staying in the background was strength. That my sacrifices were noble simply because they were invisible. But dignity doesn't pay for betrayal. Silence doesn't protect your legacy. And strength, when hidden too long, starts to rot. Done, she said. Board packets go out Friday, meeting Monday. I'll co-chair. I hung up and stared at my screen. 3 days. 3 days until the board and Tyler found out that the woman he fired owned him. I didn't celebrate. I didn't toast. I went for a walk. The air was sharp, the Colorado wind slicing across my cheeks like cold truth. I passed the neighborhood park where I used to take Tyler after school, the same one where he first told me he wanted to run something big. He was 6. He wanted to build a robot zoo. Back then he looked up to me, trusted me, loved me. And somewhere between that playground and the 21st floor of our downtown office, that boy disappeared. Now he'd learned that I hadn't disappeared with him. I was still here, and I was about to remind him who built the foundation he stood on. The next morning, I walked into the office. Not my home office, his office. I didn't use a side door. I didn't sneak in. I walked past reception in my old gray blazer, holding my head like the co-founder I truly was. People stared. Some whispered. Some had the decency to nod. Tyler wasn't in yet. His assistant looked up, startled. Can I help? Just tell him Joanne Carlisle stopped by, I said, and I smiled, and that I won't be needing a visitor's badge next time. I left before she could answer, because on Monday morning when the board sits down and Tyler walks in, ready to dazzle them with his empty charm, he'll find me at the head of the table, not as his mother, not as a consultant, but as the woman who owns the ground beneath his feet. There are betrayals that cut quickly like knives, obvious, brutal, loud. Then there are betrayals that creep up on you slowly, quietly, with the soft hands of someone you once loved. You don't even realize it's happening until you're standing in the aftermath, staring at the rubble, wondering how long you've been bleeding. What Tyler did to me in that meeting room was only the beginning. The real betrayal came later when I heard what he said about me behind closed doors. It was a week before the board meeting. I had come into the office after hours to retrieve a box of old tax files I kept tucked away in my former office, now used for storage. I knew the building like the back of my hand. I knew which elevators still worked after 6 p.m., which lights flickered if you didn't tap the switch twice. What I didn't know was that Tyler was still there on the 18th floor in the small lounge by the executive suite. I heard his voice before I saw him, loud, confident. That smooth, careless drawl he used around people he wanted to impress. She's a relic, he said. I only kept her around this long because it made the investors feel warm and fuzzy, like we were a family business or something. Total PR value, that's all. There was laughter, a woman's voice, shallow, sharp. Probably Mia, his wife. I never liked her. She smiled with her teeth, not her eyes. Oh, come on, Tyler, she said playfully. She's your mother. That's harsh. He laughed. Please, don't even start. She's lucky I let her linger this long. Honestly, I've been planning to phase her out for months. She clings to her title like it means something. Another laugh, another jab. She still acts like she built this thing, as if she didn't just write checks and hover around like a nervous school teacher. I built this, me, every bit of it. Something inside me broke. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just stood there, half hidden behind the corner, one hand on the box of files I came to retrieve, the other clenched into a fist. He had rewritten the story so thoroughly in his mind that he believed it. Believed I had done nothing, that I was dead weight, that I was decoration, flesh and blood, reduced to branding. I stood in that hallway for what felt like hours after they left, listening to silence, feeling something inside me settle low and dark. Not rage, not yet. Resolve. Tyler didn't just fire me. He didn't just humiliate me. He obliterated me, erased me from the narrative, from memory, from gratitude. He took the years I spent fighting for his future and tossed them into a shredder and then joked about it over cocktails and conference calls. I went home that night and didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering the time he was 14 and broke his arm during a school soccer game. He didn't want to go to the ER because he was scared it would hurt more. I sat on the field with him for an hour, holding his hand, promising everything would be okay. It wasn't about the bone that night, it was about fear. His fear. And my job back then was to protect him from it. Now here I was nursing a shattered soul while he celebrated. And yet, despite all of that, what hurt most wasn't the cruelty. It was the indifference. The way he tossed me aside without hesitation, the ease of it. Like I'd never mattered. Like I was just another outdated tool in his box. I always thought betrayal would feel like fire. But this felt colder. Like snow in your lungs. Like drowning in ice. For days, I went about my routines like a ghost. I'd sit at my kitchen table with a cup of tea I never drank, staring out the window as if the trees might tell me what to do. And then one morning, I opened the hallway closet and saw an old photo album wedged between Christmas boxes. I pulled it out and sat on the floor. Inside were photos of Tyler as a baby wrapped in a blue blanket at the hospital, held to my chest, with tubes still in my arms. His first birthday, his kindergarten graduation, the lemonade stand, we built out of scrap wood because he wanted to buy his own bike. Every page was a chapter in a book only I remembered. Tears finally came then, not hot tears of rage, but quiet ones of mourning. Not just for the boy I raised, but for the mother I had been, the woman who believed that love could prevent this kind of fall. But love without boundaries becomes self-erasure. And I was done erasing myself. By the time I stood up, my knees cracked and my spine ached, but my resolve had hardened into steel. Tyler had rewritten our story. Now it was time I wrote the ending. The board meeting was in 4 days, and for the first time in years, I was going to walk into a room not as his mother, not as a silent partner, but as the woman who still held the pen. They say you can't go back. That once a team disbands, the bond is broken. That time moves on and people forget. But people don't forget everything. They remember who showed up for them when no one else did. They remember who gave them a chance, who trusted them before their resumes sparkled. They remember who fought for them when others tried to shut them out. And I remembered too. I remembered the ones Tyler discarded, like used napkins, when he started his crusade for sleek and shiny. I remembered the ones he called dead weight while building his castle of smoke and mirrors, the ones who still believed in doing business with heart and honesty. They were my people, and I needed them now. The first call I made was to Leo Ramirez, our former lead engineer. Tyler had forced him out 2 years ago after a disagreement about scaling the platform. Leo was brilliant, but cautious. He refused to deploy a major update Tyler pushed for warning it would cause system-wide instability. He was right. It crashed. Tyler blamed him anyway. Leo moved to Seattle, started freelancing. Last I heard, he was working for a competitor in a quieter, less chaotic role. "Joanne," he said, surprised. "Wow, I didn't expect well. It's good to hear your voice." "I need to talk to you," I said, "about Tyler and about the company." He didn't hesitate. Say when and where. I flew out the next morning. We met in a small cafe near Pike Place Market, surrounded by tourists and gulls and the smell of roasted coffee. His hair had gone grayer, his eyes a little wearier, but the fire was still there. I laid it all out for him. Tyler's betrayal, the lies, the erasure, the truth about the ownership structure. Leo didn't even blink. "I knew he'd implode eventually," he said. "But I didn't know he'd drag you down to do it." "He didn't drag me down," I said softly. "He just forgot who built the ladder." He leaned back and smiled. "Tell me what you need." Over the next 3 days, I made more calls. Ellen Brower, our original head of HR. She'd resigned after Tyler slashed employee benefits and made the workplace hostile and cold in her words. Rafi Das, the marketing wizard who built our first viral campaign, but was replaced by a flashy firm Tyler found at a Vegas tech conference. June Le, our first product manager, the one who managed launches with Post-it notes and coffee-stained spreadsheets because we couldn't afford better tools at the time. Every one of them picked up the phone, and every one of them said the same thing in their own way. Whatever you're doing, I'm in. We met in secret, coffee shops, Zoom calls, late-night emails. We called ourselves the Old Guard. It started as a joke, a callback to how Tyler once referred to anyone over 40 as operational fossils, but we wore it with pride because we knew what he never could, that loyalty, honesty, and shared sacrifice build companies that last. The plan was simple. I would walk into the boardroom with evidence, documents, testimonies, timelines. I would expose what Tyler had hidden, misused funds, inflated metrics, the slow rot beneath the gloss. But I wouldn't do it alone. I wanted the board to see the faces of the company they had forgotten. So we assembled statements, video messages, letters signed by employees past and present. Leo offered technical evidence. Ellen compiled reports from HR files she'd quietly backed up before leaving. June gave me a launch timeline Tyler had doctored to cover a delay, then lied about to investors. Bit by bit, we were building a case, not just against Tyler's performance, but against his character. And I knew one thing for certain. When Tyler walked into that meeting on Monday expecting another round of applause, he was going to find something else entirely. Truth. I thought I'd feel rage, vengeance, some twisted form of glee. But I didn't. What I felt was something quieter, heavier, like I was carrying a memory into battle. A memory of what this company was supposed to be, what it used to be. A dream not of domination, but of legacy. Of a place where people mattered, not just their performance reviews. I wasn't doing this for revenge anymore. I was doing it to restore what Tyler tried to erase, because this company was never his alone. It was ours, built on sleepless nights, trust, sacrifice, and belief. And it was time the world remembered that. The most dangerous thing about power isn't having it. It's when no one knows you have it. I had been the ghost in Tyler's machine for months, maybe years. He walked through the office barking orders, signing deals, dismissing people like chess pieces, never realizing the queen was still on the board, hidden, waiting. That was my weapon, silence. But silence, as I've learned, is only power if you know when to break it. With the board meeting days away, I started pushing quietly, surgically against the cracks Tyler had created. I wasn't looking for chaos. I was looking for pressure points, weak spots, places where one whisper could collapse the illusion. I started with the investors. Through North Hollow Ventures, I still had access to the investor relations portal, documents, reports, financial summaries, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Tyler had been doctoring performance numbers, not in ways that were easily illegal, but in ways that were undeniably deceptive. He had lumped pilot partnerships into confirmed revenue, exaggerated projections, hidden churn rates behind aggressive onboarding cycles. It was smoke and mirrors polished in PowerPoint. To the untrained eye, it looked like growth. To someone like me, it looked like a slow-moving disaster. Worse, he was preparing for another funding round, a $20 million Series C. I scanned the deck he was planning to present. Every single page was wrapped in lies. No mention of failed vendor relationships, no disclosure of the 18% drop in platform reliability, no reference to the mass employee turnover in the last 2 quarters. I sat back in my chair, stunned by the audacity. And then I remembered, of course, he could lie. He'd been lying for years, to clients, to staff, to me. I could have exposed him right then, sent an anonymous tip to the VC firm, forwarded internal documents, blown the whistle. But that would have been too easy, too fast. And I wasn't here to wound. I was here to take the crown. So instead, I waited. I attended meetings through silent proxy. I watched emails roll in from his executive team riddled with blind spots and ego. They all assumed I was gone, forgotten, that the old woman had left with her dignity limping behind her. What they didn't know was that I was holding the detonator. Still, it wasn't just the finances I needed to monitor, it was Tyler himself. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I asked Mia to lunch, his wife. The same woman I once watched mock me with perfect teeth and a manicured smile. But Mia wasn't just a bystander. She sat in on strategy meetings. She whispered in Tyler's ear. And I knew deep down she didn't trust him either. Because people like Mia don't marry out of love. They marry upward. And when the elevator starts going down, they look for a better floor. We met at a rooftop bistro downtown. She wore designer sunglasses and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my mortgage. She was surprised to see me nervous, even but curious. Why now, she asked, sipping her champagne like it was armor. I smiled. Because you've always been smart, Mia, and smart women see what's coming before it hits. Her lips twitched. What do you think is coming? I didn't answer. I just slid a file across the table. Inside, numbers, real ones, screenshots, statements, a taste of what Tyler was hiding. She didn't open it there, but I watched her eyes flick to the North Hollow watermark and narrow. I'm not asking you to take sides, I said. I'm telling you the ship is sinking, and I'm offering you a life raft. You want me to betray my husband? I looked her dead in the eyes. I want you to tell the truth. She left before dessert. But 2 hours later, I got a text from a blocked number. Check his private Dropbox. Folder, exec brief, internal only. You'll find what you're looking for. I did. And what I found nearly made me gasp. In that folder were early drafts of investor decks with conflicting numbers, notes about backdoor pilots that were never approved, and internal Slack screenshots where Tyler and his cronies joked about massaging numbers to keep the board happy. It was fraud. Not lean startup hustle. Not creative accounting. Fraud. Now I had everything. Proof of deception. A network of allies. Silent control of the parent company. But the most valuable piece of all? Timing. Because once you break the silence, there's no going back. Once the sword leaves the sheath, the war begins. And I wanted Tyler to feel every second of it. So I waited. One final breath. One final day. Because Monday morning wasn't just another board meeting. It was execution day. And the boy who thought I was invisible was about to choke on the sight of me. If you want to destroy a kingdom, you don't attack the castle walls. You go for the treasury. You find the cracks in the foundation, the unpaid bills, the hidden debts, the gilded lies tucked neatly between spreadsheets. Because behind every empire built on ego, there's a ledger soaked in secrets. And Tyler's were bleeding through. After Mia tipped me off, I went deeper. I brought in a forensic accountant, someone I trusted, someone Tyler didn't know. Her name was Nora Greer. Quiet, methodical, ruthless with a calculator. She used to work for a Fortune 500 audit firm until she got tired of watching CEOs manipulate numbers while claiming innocence. We met in a coffee shop 2 towns over. I handed her access credentials, investor reports, quarterly statements, tax summaries. Don't just look for mistakes, I told her. Look for patterns. Look for the lies hidden as logic. She raised one eyebrow and smiled, my favorite kind. Within 2 days, she found the first fracture. Tyler had been padding client counts. He was reporting users who had canceled services months ago, relisting them under legacy tier clients to inflate retention numbers. He was also double counting short-term pilot users as full-time subscribers in quarterly briefs. To someone glancing at the surface, it looked like explosive growth. In reality, it was a paper house. But that wasn't the worst of it. Buried in a reimbursement log, Nora found something subtle, a series of charges tagged as consulting fees, monthly payments small enough not to raise alarms but consistent. They were going to a shell company registered in Nevada. She followed the money. The company was owned by one of Tyler's college friends, a failed entrepreneur with no professional background in consulting. Nora traced $278,000 paid over the last year for advice. What that told me was simple. Tyler was embezzling, slowly, cleverly, under the guise of mentorship and third-party guidance, but still embezzling. It wasn't just a matter of ethics anymore. It was a matter of law, and the board needed to see it. I spent the weekend putting everything into a presentation, clean, thorough, inescapably damning. There were graphs, side-by-side comparisons, annotated excerpts, flagged transactions. Nora's full report was included as an appendix, signed and notarized. I wasn't leaving a single stone unturned. Because if there's one thing I learned from years of sacrifice, it's this. Truth without proof is just noise, and I wasn't going to raise my voice. I was going to bury them in evidence. But I didn't stop with numbers. I included letters from staff Tyler had terminated for questioning his methods. I included screenshots from anonymous internal surveys that called his leadership toxic and volatile. I even included a statement from Leo, our original engineer, outlining how Tyler's push for unstable platform updates led to months of service issues and lost revenue, while Tyler blamed support staff for the glitches. It was all there. A case not just for removal, but for accountability. And yet, I knew Tyler. I knew how he operated. He would come into that meeting in a tailored suit with just the right amount of fake humility spinning tales about early-stage growth pains and startup flexibility. He'd call it a misunderstanding, a transitional hiccup. He'd paint me as bitter, emotional, past her prime. So I saved one more surprise, one final piece. A letter from Amelia Grant, the very woman whose money built his empire. She co-signed the financial concerns, she confirmed my ownership stake, she endorsed the motion for an emergency leadership vote, she backed my claim publicly, formally, and on letterhead. That was the nail in the coffin. Because Tyler could dismiss my tears. He could mock my age. He could even ignore Nora's report. But he couldn't ignore Amelia Grant. Not when she was the reason he ever got a seat at the table in the first place. By Sunday night, my hands weren't shaking anymore. I looked at the documents one last time, neatly printed, clipped, numbered. I placed them in a leather folder, no flash drive, no laptop. I wanted to walk into that room and place the truth on the table paper ink signature. Something he couldn't delete, something that would outlast the spin. This wasn't just a financial reckoning. This was my name reclaiming its place. This was history being rewritten correctly this time. And tomorrow morning, when the board sat down, when the air grew thick with expectation, when Tyler smiled and leaned back in his chair, thinking the room still belonged to him, he'd open his mouth to gloat, and I'd hand him every page of his undoing. I arrived early. Not fashionably early, not politely early, strategically early. The boardroom was empty when I stepped inside its long glass table gleaming under recessed lighting chairs, lined in perfect symmetry, like soldiers awaiting orders. The room hadn't changed much since I designed it. Mahogany trim steel fixtures, clean lines that spoke of authority. But today it didn't belong to Tyler. It belonged to me. I took my seat not at the far end, not along the wall, at the head of the table. The chair Tyler usually claimed with his entitled lean and rehearsed charm. I set the leather folder down in front of me like a weapon. This was no longer a negotiation. This was judgment. The board members trickled in, each one pausing slightly when they saw me in that seat. There were nods. Some were surprised. Some seemed uncomfortable. But no one asked me to move. They had all received my preliminary brief the night before. They knew why we were here. 5 minutes before the meeting, Tyler strutted in. Crisp navy suit, smug grin. One hand adjusting his cufflink, the other holding his phone like it was an extension of his ego. And then he saw me. He paused. Blink. Smile, falter. That 1 second, that flicker, was all I needed. "Mom," he said slowly, his tone dipped in condescension. "What are you doing here?" I leaned back, calm, collected. Exercising my authority as primary voting member of North Hollow Ventures, I said, "We called this emergency board meeting to discuss your removal as CEO." The room shifted, not a gasp, not a shock, but silence. That kind of silence, again, the one before a storm. His smile twitched. "Excuse me?" I opened the folder. "Before we begin, I'd like to distribute hard copies of the report I submitted yesterday, for those who prefer to hold the truth in their hands." Tyler didn't sit down. He just stood there stunned as the board members passed the documents around page after page of financial discrepancies, falsified reporting embezzlement, disguised as consulting fees. Nora's findings, Amelia's letter, staff testimonies, legal exposure outlined in black and white. "None of this is accurate," Tyler blurted. "This is a smear campaign. She's bitter. You all know she's been." "You're out of order," said Amelia's representative, dialed in via speaker. "And for the record, Joanne has full board rights under North Hollow's equity clause. That includes the right to propose and vote on executive changes." Tyler's face flushed, but he tried to recover. These are startup growing pains. Every company massages projections. If we want to scale, you didn't massage projections, I said coldly. You lied. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Your own wife gave us access to your hidden folders, the ones with conflicting numbers, the ones you didn't expect anyone to find. That shut him up. He looked around the room, eyes scanning for support, for loyalty, for someone to rescue him. But all he saw were people reading, page after page of his downfall. I built this company. He tried again, voice cracking just slightly. I'm the reason we have funding. I'm the face of the brand. You're a brand built on fraud, I cut in. And today the board has a choice. Protect that lie or protect the company. The room was quiet again. Then slowly, Gerald, our longest-serving board member, spoke up. I move for a vote of no confidence in Tyler Carlisle as CEO, he said, clearing his throat. Effective immediately. I second the motion, came another voice. Tyler slammed his hands on the table. This is insane, he barked. You're replacing me with her. She hasn't run anything in years. No, I said calmly, rising to my feet. You replaced yourself with your arrogance, your recklessness, your need to erase everyone who ever helped you. I looked around the room. I gave up my life for this company, my marriage, my health, my future, and I did it for him. I did it because I believed he would honor what we built, but instead he exploited it. He turned our values into marketing slogans. He turned our legacy into leverage, and now it's time to take it back. The vote was swift, unanimous. Tyler stood frozen as the decision was recorded, his title stripped in seconds. It was done. He didn't say another word as he walked out, head down, jaw-clenched, hands trembling. I wondered for just a moment if he would look back. He didn't. He left the same way he'd fired me, quiet, cowardly. But this time, I wasn't the one in tears. I sat down slowly. The board began discussing interim leadership. I didn't hear most of it because I wasn't just thinking about the victory. I was thinking about everything it cost and how sometimes justice isn't loud. It's just final. They say power corrupts, but I think what really corrupts is forgetting where power comes from. It doesn't come from titles on doors or applause in boardrooms, not from flashy suits or trending headlines. Real power, the kind that endures, comes from sweat, sacrifice, and survival. And I had survived everything Tyler threw at me. And now everyone was about to see who really ran the empire. After the vote, the board asked if I would remain as interim CEO while they evaluated long-term leadership options. I said no. Not because I didn't want it, but because I had something bigger in mind. I'll stay involved, I told them, voice calm, unwavering, but it's time everyone knows who really owns this company. There was a pause and then murmurs. It was time to lift the last veil. I stood again and walked to the front of the boardroom, calmly, deliberately flipping open one final document, my ownership disclosure. I am the majority shareholder of North Hollow Ventures, I said, which currently owns a controlling stake in this company. No more hints, no more anonymous proxies. Their eyes widened. Some blinked. Others leaned forward, stunned. Wait, one of the newer board members asked. But I thought North Hollow was run by an investment firm. It is, I said. And I'm the majority stakeholder in that firm, have been for the last 4 years. Silence. Then Gerald, who had been with us since our second year of operations, let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. This wasn't about revenge, I continued. It was about truth, about ownership, and about restoring the values we started with before this company became a playground for arrogance. I turned toward the window for a moment. The Denver skyline shimmered beyond the glass. I could see the very streets I once drove late at night, sleep-deprived and desperate, hauling inventory in my aging Honda. I turned back. I invested everything I had in this company. Money, time, my health, my family. And I did it not because I wanted credit, but because I believed in something bigger than myself. I believed in building something that mattered. I looked around the room, and then I said the words Tyler never could. This company doesn't belong to one man's ego. It belongs to its people. I paused, and now it belongs to someone who will protect it. There was no applause, no standing ovation, just nods, respectful, real. And I realized then I didn't need noise to feel powerful. I just needed truth to echo in the right room. The press release went out that evening. Carlisle Tech founder regains control after financial scandal. Tyler's name was buried in the second paragraph. Mine was in the headline. There were calls, media inquiries, requests for interviews. I turned down most of them. Let the facts speak. Let the silence haunt him the way he once tried to haunt me. I didn't need to smear him. He did that to himself. But I did accept one interview with a journalist from a small business publication that had once profiled us in the early days. The same woman who wrote about our first office above the taco shop. The same one who quoted Tyler back then, calling me the heart behind the hustle. She asked the final question off the record. "Do you feel vindicated?" I looked at her for a long moment. "No," I said finally. "I feel restored." She nodded. I walked out into the sunlight. No cameras, no spotlights. Just me. The same blazer I wore the day I was fired, the same spine I used to carry us through every storm. And now, the company bore my name again. Not in print, but in presence. And this time, it would stay there. Taking back power is one thing. Keeping it clean is another. Tyler may have been removed from the throne, but his fingerprints were still smeared all over the kingdom. His cronies, his toxic policies, his hollow buzzwords plastered across every hallway. The company I once helped build with grit and honesty had become a shell of itself, shiny on the outside, hollow inside. And I was done pretending that a single vote could fix what years of arrogance had corroded. So I did what mothers do best when the house has been neglected too long. I cleaned. The Monday after the board meeting, I walked back into Carlisle Tech not as an interim leader or a ghost from the past, but as its true owner. And this time, I didn't flinch when people looked. I wanted them to see me. All of me. The woman they erased. The founder they forgot. The force they didn't see coming. I started with HR. I met with Ellen Brower, the former HR head Tyler had forced out. She came back without hesitation, still sharp, still unafraid to speak truth. We reviewed every complaint buried under non-actionable status. We called every employee who had been quietly pushed out under Tyler's reign. Sexist jokes at meetings, passive-aggressive firing of older staff, promotions reserved for friends of friends. It was all there layered in silence and shame. We built a list. 12 names, executives and department heads Tyler had elevated, who didn't just enable the rot, they were the rot. Some had mocked employees for asking mental health days. Some had pressured junior staff into unpaid overtime. One had blacklisted an entire team because they questioned a campaign Tyler had forced through. They were all let go. No scandal, no headlines, just swift, clean severance and a line they couldn't cross again. Some protested. "You're creating a witch hunt," one said. "No," I replied, "I'm exorcising the demons." Then came the culture. I took down the marble vision wall Tyler had commissioned in the lobby, a $40,000 installation that said nothing and meant less. I replaced it with a mural of our early employees built from photos submitted voluntarily. It showed laughter, failure, brainstorming, burnt pizza nights, and the first whiteboard filled with marker dreams. Real things, not vanity. I called in Leo Raffi in June from the old guard. They helped me redesign team structures, restore the flattened hierarchy we once thrived under. Managers had to reapply for leadership roles. Every applicant, internal or returning, had to answer one question. What does integrity mean when no one is watching? I read every response myself. We brought back transparency town halls, canceled wasteful executive retreats, rebuilt the mentorship program Ellen once championed, pairing senior staff with rising talent, not based on titles, but shared passion. And something strange started to happen. People smiled in the halls again. Laughter returned to lunch breaks. Staff who had gone quiet in meetings began to speak up, not just with safe ideas, but bold ones. It wasn't perfect, not yet. There was still fear, hesitation. People who tiptoed, wondering if the change would last. So I walked the floors myself, sat at shared desks, ate in the lunchroom with junior developers and receptionists. I asked questions. I listened. And slowly they began to believe that the woman Tyler tried to erase wasn't just a symbol. She was real. One afternoon, a young woman named Ava approached me in the break room. She was shaking. I thought she was going to ask for leave or maybe a resignation form. Instead, she said, "Thank you for making this feel human again." I didn't respond right away. My throat closed around 100 words that didn't fit. All I could do was nod, because that's what this had always been about. Not money, not revenge, humanity. I went home that night to my quiet house, my teacup cooling beside me, and I allowed myself one moment of stillness. No phone, no laptop, just me. And the woman in the mirror who finally looked like she belonged again. I had cleaned the house. Now it was ready to be lived in again. He showed up at my door the next evening. No warning, no call, just the low hum of a car engine outside and then the hesitant knock I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, coming home past curfew. I opened it to find Tyler standing there in a windbreaker, eyes sunk in hands shoved deep into his pockets. For a second, he looked like the boy I used to pick up from soccer practice, tired, unsure, needing something, but too proud to say it. We stood there for a long moment. "I didn't know where else to go," he said. I didn't say anything, just opened the door wider. He stepped inside. The house was quiet like always. No ticking clocks, no background music, just the weight of everything unsaid. He sat at the edge of the couch like a stranger in a doctor's waiting room, shoulders hunched, eyes on the floor. I stayed standing, arms crossed, not cold, just guarded. I read everything he finally said. The board report, your ownership file, Amelia's letter, all of it. And I asked. He swallowed. "It's worse than I thought." "No, Tyler," I said quietly. "It's exactly what you made it." His shoulders tensed. "I didn't realize how far it had gone," he murmured. "I thought I was fixing things, innovating, staying ahead. I didn't mean to erase me." He flinched. "I was scared," he said. "Scared I'd look weak if I said you still helped me. Scared they wouldn't respect me if they saw I needed my mother in the room." I stared at him, the pain cold and sharp but strangely distant now. "You didn't just erase me," I said. "You erased the truth. You lied to employees, to investors, to the people who bled beside you. You didn't just fear looking weak. You feared sharing credit." He looked up, and for the first time in months I saw something real in his eyes. Shame. "I was wrong," he whispered. "About everything?" I didn't rush to comfort him, because this wasn't a child's mistake. This wasn't a broken toy or a forgotten birthday card. This was betrayal, repeated, calculated, willful. I came to ask for another chance, he said, voice cracking. Not as CEO, not in charge, just something, anything. "You came for forgiveness," I said. He didn't deny it. I walked to the window, stared out at the dark Colorado sky. The same stars I used to point out to him through the car window on late-night drives. Orion, Cassiopeia, dreams stitched in starlight. "You want me to forget," I said. "But forgiveness isn't forgetting, and it's not trust. It's letting go of the knife." He turned in his seat. "Then, can we start over?" I turned to face him. "I don't hate you, Tyler, but I also don't trust you. Not with this company, not with my legacy, not yet." He nodded slowly like a verdict he already expected. "But I'm still your son," he said. "That has to count for something." "It did," I said, voice soft but unyielding. "It counted when I gave you everything. When I stayed up at night fixing what you broke. When I kept silent even after you fired me like a stranger. That name son meant the world to me. You're the one who treated it like a transaction." Tears welled in his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. "Please, Mom," he said, "just tell me what I need to do." I sat across from him, hands clasped. "You start by being quiet, by watching, by working at the bottom where you once stood. You start by earning respect, not demanding it." He nodded fast. I'll do anything." "You don't get to rebuild with me," I said, not cruel, just honest. "You rebuild yourself, away from me, from Carlisle Tech, from everything you poisoned with your ambition." His face fell. "I'm not shutting the door forever," I added, "but I'm not opening it just because you remember how to knock." Silence filled the room again, and then slowly he stood. "I understand," he said. I wish I could undo it." I stood too, walked him to the door. "You can't, but you can choose what you become now." He looked at me, something deep flickering behind his eyes. Grief, maybe, or humility. or the beginnings of manhood he skipped over when he chose power over people. He nodded again, then stepped outside. At the curb, he turned once. "Goodbye, Mom." I didn't say goodbye. I just closed the door and let it settle behind me like a final quiet exhale. It's strange, the quiet that comes after battle. For months, I'd lived in stormlight boardroom ambushes, late-night strategy calls, truths sharpened into weapons. My days had been driven by the sting of betrayal, the weight of silence, and the need to reclaim something I never should have lost. And now the war was over. I stood alone in the top-floor office morning light, washing over glass and steel. It was the same corner office Tyler once occupied, like a thrown-oversized desk, slick decor, a whiskey cart he never used but kept for effect. It smelled different now. Clean. Real. I didn't bring back the old furniture. I didn't reinstall the frosted glass walls or the decorative awards Tyler had displayed like proof of existence. Instead, I hung one thing on the wall, a framed photograph of the original team from our first product launch. We were crammed into a single room, cheeks flushed from sleepless nights, arms slung over shoulders. Tyler was there, too younger, softer still, teachable. I looked at that photo every morning, not to dwell, but to remember what mattered. The company didn't need a new vision. It needed its soul back, and that's what I gave it. Not slogans, not headlines, just consistency, clarity, compassion. We redesigned onboarding to focus on mentorship. We opened up the books to staff, showing them where the money went and why. We established a profit-sharing program, quarterly volunteer days, an internal fund for employee emergencies. Because people matter, even when it's inconvenient, especially then. I didn't need to be CEO. I appointed Leo as interim chief, and within months he earned the role permanently. He was the kind of leader we needed, quiet, principled, unafraid to listen. I stayed on as chairwoman, and that was enough. The press tried to turn the scandal into a saga. Mother overthrows son in corporate coup. I didn't take the bait. Let them call it a coup. I called it a correction. Tyler kept his distance. I heard whispers that he moved to Arizona working on a startup with former college friends. I didn't follow the details. I wasn't ready. Maybe one day. Maybe not. Forgiveness is a process, but it's not an obligation. I had forgiven myself. That was enough for now. One evening, nearly a year after the boardroom vote, I hosted a staff dinner in the atrium. Nothing fancy. Folding tables, home-cooked food, laughter echoing between the pillars. I wore the same gray blazer I'd worn the day I was fired, pressed, polished, reborn. Toward the end of the night, a young woman from the design team raised a glass. To Joanne Carlisle, she said, for proving that real leadership doesn't scream, it builds. The toast swept through the room like light cracking through ice. And in that moment, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt seen, fully. Finally, because I wasn't just the mother who sacrificed everything. I wasn't just the woman who was betrayed. I wasn't even just the one who fought back. I was the legacy. Not a footnote, not a prop, not a ghost. The founder, the backbone, the soul. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to beg to be remembered. I simply was.